Hello, welcome to Nice
Hello,
Tuesdays.
Matt.
Yeah,
Thank
how are
you
you
for
doing?
having me.
Not at all.
Yeah, good. Near home here in East London.
Yeah,
so
exactly. You
feeling
live
good.
quite close. You've had the
That's
8-minute
right.
hop.
Yeah.
And you're well. How are you doing at the moment?
I'm very good. I mean, a little bit of pressure. I cannot see you guys, but it's
Yeah.
good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, it's great to have you here on the Nice Tuesday stage. We've got quite a lot to get into, and you know, not that much time. So let's
go.
Let's get going. I guess first question was kind of, do you remember what first drew you to photography as a medium? Like, do you remember what it was that kind of first excited you about picking up a camera?
Yeah, I feel like I was really young when I first picked up a camera. I think I might have been 6 or 7 years old.
Wow, that's young, yeah.
Yeah, but for me it was just a toy, and I think that's what is really kept the magic alive. And really, it was all about magic. I couldn't really understand how. I was born in 1992, so my first camera was obviously still a film camera, and it was just my dad's camera, and it was just very exciting to press a button and then go to the lab and pick up the pictures. I was fascinated by that whole process.
Yeah, I guess it's a different process to shooting digitally now. You know, you're like you understand the kind of craft and the process of it when you're shooting on film, right?
Yeah, I think back in the days, obviously, we just took it to sort of like the Spanish version of snaps, but it was still quite special, like that idea. I still very much remember. I think my first interaction with photography was actually in a photo booth. I remember I had to take my school picture, and in order to, send it to the school office, I finally went into the photo booth in the supermarket. Every time I went to the supermarket, I wanted to go to the photo booth, and finally I got my one chance. I think like for me what it felt so magic was sort of like, how could like reality be forever captured into something physical?
I love the idea that you go to a supermarket and the thing that you really want to do as a kid is not like look at the sweets, but it's the photo booth.
There was a little bit of that as well. But
I feel you were born to be a photographer. You then moved to London to study photography, and it's interesting you talk about magic, because I think some people find that like the magic is kind of lost when you study something in a way, that kind of when you study something closely. How did you find studying photography here? Like, was it a sense of, I guess, like honing your craft, but did you lose a bit of the magic, or was it something you just loved from start to finish?
Well, I definitely lost a little bit of magic. I guess when you really learn something, the mystery is gone. But yeah, I think like my biggest school was really London, being here. I did go to the fancy schools, and that was quite an experience on its own. But I think I really learned. I moved to London. I come from a middle class family from the south of Spain, so really living in London wasn't easy for me when I first moved here as a student. And I think the need to make a living to support myself was my real teaching. So I really, I wasn't scared to knock on doors and say, I like taking pictures. Is there anything I can do for you? So London was definitely the right city to do that, because there were so many opportunities when I first came.
I mean, how important is that as a photographer? You're a young photographer coming to London for the first time. It's quite a brave thing to do, to go and knock on doors and say like, yeah, hi, you don't know me, but can I take your photo? Like that's...
Yeah, I mean, lots of people didn't take me seriously. The majority of people I wrote to didn't really give me a chance at the beginning. But I think if you really believe on something, you just have to keep trying. And also, I think being very young really helps. I guess you are less conscious of how unprepared you are, and that somehow makes it a little bit easier, because you are not so critical of yourself. You don't know how much more you're going to learn in the future and how humbled you're going to feel about your beginnings. So I think when you're 18 years old, somehow you are not... don't get me wrong, I was really shy and it was hard for me, but somehow I don't think I could restart my career now. I think I needed to be that young and sort of don't have that fear that I kind of like have developed further as I got more experience somehow.
Yeah, no, the fearlessness of youth, I think that's definitely a very important part of it. I guess now, like, you know, obviously you're much more experienced now than you were. Like, can you describe what it is that you're looking for now in an image? And we're obviously going to come on to talk about lots of your work and you know, beyond photography as well. But for now, let's stick with photography. What is it that you're kind of looking for? What mix of things are you looking for from an image when you see something you're like, yeah, I've nailed that?
Well, I never really have quite that feeling of nailing something. I guess like I'm never fully satisfied, and that's what keeps me going. But I feel reality or like honesty is something very important to me. I'm not a documentary photographer, but I never want my pictures to feel staged or like they are dishonest somehow, which is something really hard to translate into images, because how is an image dishonest or honest, right? But yeah, I guess I'm really trying to capture this authenticity. That's really important to me. And then aesthetics are really important as well. I feel like a lot of photography is more about what the image contains, but having had like this attention to craft and going into the darkroom, colors are super important. So I want a picture to feel appealing, perhaps is the wrong word, because art doesn't necessarily need to be beautiful, but I do want my audience to be attracted to the image, and I think you can use aesthetics and color to create that attraction.
Really interesting. You mentioned that word authentic there, which is really interesting, because I mean, you were talking earlier about how you've obviously now done shoots with, you know, for huge campaigns with huge teams on set, massive productions, and you're kind of trying now, as and when you can, to limit the size and the scale of those productions, maybe limit the number of people on set. Like, can you talk me through why that is and how you find that, I guess, helps with the final image that you might end up with?
I just feel that when I'm taking a photograph, the most important part for me is my subject, the person I'm photographing. I feel when productions become really big, they are all distractions, right? It feels like it's all about how good the food is or how much equipment we have in the studio. But really a photograph is about the photographer, well, at least in the case of a portrait, it's about connecting to another person, being able to tell their stories. So big productions can often be a distraction for creating that connection. That's why I really try to keep it small, and you know, also I don't want to my sitter to be struggling or to feel that it's something bigger than it needs to be. I don't know if that answers.
I guess there's a big pressure if you're sitting for a portrait and there's 1,000 people running around, it can feel a heightened stress.
And I feel like if you have a lot of equipment, doesn't necessarily mean that you're a better photographer. Maybe you're like a photographer with a large budget, but I don't think that necessarily makes for a better picture. So I like the simplicity of just a camera, a person, what it is that we are trying to achieve, and focus on that.
I mean, staying with the photography work for a little bit longer, I'd love to talk about Okini, which was this series of photographs you took in Kyoto. And I guess it was, you know, you said you're not a documentary photographer, but this felt a little bit more in that documentary world. You were documenting the city's teenagers. First off, could you just tell us, I guess, a bit about how that series came about? Because I think you like relocated to Kyoto for a few months for that, right?
That's right. So I spent 3 months in Kyoto. I obviously been fascinated by Japanese photography for a really long time. I feel, well, art in general in Japan is quite different to that of many other cultures, mostly because for how many years Japan is being isolated from the rest of the world. I feel like that's given them an opportunity to develop their own language without very little external influence. And I think that translates directly into photography. Many of my favorite photographers are Japanese. So I sort of wanted to practice in the same arena.
And this project, I guess you were yeah, you were photographing lots of teenagers in doing their normal pursuits after school, at school. I'm kind of fascinated, like, what was the process of that like? I mean, getting access to, those individuals, like, yeah, how difficult was it, or how easy was it to kind of work in Kyoto in that way?
It was really hard because, well, Japan in general, it's a really different culture from mine, but especially in Kyoto, even Japanese people themselves would refer to Kyotojin, so people from the city of Kyoto, as being two-faced because, well, there is a really strong sense of tradition and they really need to keep up to that standard. They really worry about what other people are gonna think about them. And you, in many circles, you are not really welcome as a foreigner. But lucky enough, I was working with Kyotography. And Kyotography is a photography festival that happens in the city of Kyoto every September. And they really helped me. They had that, like, there are relationships that really take years to form. And they really welcomed me, introduced me to many of the people I wanted to photograph. And we sort of like started to create that network. Also, aside of that, because as you said, I really I like small productions and doing things a little bit different. I will just like go many evenings to work by the river when these teenagers I was photographing will be coming out of school, and I just got someone to write like in Japanese, "I'm a photographer. I want to take your picture. I'm not dangerous. May I take your picture?" And that actually worked really well because I feel like I position myself. I think photography, I mean, many things in life are about vulnerability, you know? When you position yourself at the same level as your subject, I feel it's much easier to gain access.
And kind of gain their trust, I guess, as
yeah,
well.
Yes. Be like, oh, this is genuine. I'm just like a girl who wants to take your photo.
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Amazing. I mean, because that project was very much about like teenagerhood, or I guess like young adulthood, and it seems like a theme that you've kind of returned to in a different guises throughout your work. Like you've got this series on Cambridge students as well, which I think you've described as being forever work in progress, which is a nice way of thinking about it. What is it about like young adulthood that you think is kind of so fascinating and that you kind of constantly come back to, I guess?
I feel teenagers are in this very strange like phase of existing. I feel they are somehow learning to be adults. So for many things, they want to be respected and understood as adults. But there is still a part of them that the child within them is still very much present. I am very interested in change, on all kind of changes. I think when you're a teenager, it's probably when you experience the most change. And especially in Japan, being a child in Japan is you sort of are born with a golden ticket that starts becoming like smaller and smaller as years pass by, because you're meant to take on a lot of responsibility for your family. You are meant to follow your family's traditions, especially in the case of Okini, I photographed many teenagers that were meant to take on their dad's job if, you know, one of the people I photographed, their dad is being a ceramicist, and so it was his grandfather, and so it was, you know, I think it's been 16 generations of having the same job. And these teenagers are meant to take on this traditional craft job that maybe is not what they're necessarily interested in. And I was really curious to sort of explore how that felt, you know, because Japan on the one side is, you will say, is one of the most modern countries, but also is still very much stuck in tradition and in the past. So I kind of wanted to see the contrast in in teenagers.
Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing series. I'd love to come on to another series, The Minute You Have a Minute, which, yeah, it's a lovely, lovely piece. Can you talk us through that series and I guess, like, again, what it was like to shoot that one? Because it was mainly on a train.
Yeah. Well, that one I have many ways of photographing. Okini, for example, I think you asked me before why was somehow like so formal and like the frames were very much study. I feel like The Minute You Have a Minute is exactly the opposite. Also for the audience that may not know it, The Minute You Have a Minute is just a series on the Orient Express, and it's a book that just came out. So I was shooting that one in a train, and it was mostly shot in my point-and-shoot cameras. 35 millimeters. Most of the time I'm focusing medium, large, and very, very large formats. So it was quite different from Okini in the sense that it was all about spontaneity, not thinking too much, just really photographing everything that seemed appealing to me in the moment. So it's a completely different approach from Okini.
It's really interesting because I think it's something I wanted to come on to, which I think we can touch on now, is like how your practice is so varied. I mean, you know, you have, as you said, the kind of large format photography series in Kyoto, but then you're doing this kind of very much point and shoot style in that series, The Minute You Have a Minute. Like, you do enjoy, or seem to enjoy, kind of moving around from different styles and then obviously different genres, which we'll touch on next.
Yeah, I always say that is both my biggest strength and also my weakness, because I have a very curious nature, which really I get bored easily. So I really like to try things, and I'm always very aware. I almost have this anxiety for life in the sense, you know, like I may die tomorrow, and I might have not tried that. I think I have to try it. And I think versus other artists that just choose like one path and one medium, of course they are gonna become really, really good at that one medium exclusively because they dedicate all their time to that. And that's not my case. So perhaps I'm not so good at only one thing, but I do have the advantage point of really having tried many things and tried to make it work, even though I'm not an expert on many of these things I try.
That sounds incredibly, incredibly modest. But I mean, I guess that leads me on to talking about your writing, which I'd love to come on to, because I'm sure lots of people are very aware of your writing practice as well. Like, have you always been someone who's written? Like, has that always been a big part of your kind of creative practice?
Yes, yeah. As all as my photography, I will say even more. My favorite thing to do as a kid was to be locked in my bedroom for hours and hours and just read and write on my notebooks.
Okay, interesting. And I guess, like, I'm kind of curious because you've got a new book coming out that's published by Chose Commune, which I think you've already got one book with them, but it's a new book of you kind of
That's
writing
right.
on writing. But I'm kind of interested, like, what do you get from writing that you can't express necessarily with photography, or is it just completely different sides of your sides of your practice?
I think they are both very much connected. I think writing for me is kind of like the purest of all my art forms, to say it in a way. I feel like, you know, writing is really thinking on paper. And for me, in order to photograph, in order to paint, in order to do other things, I have to sit down and analyze it first, like analyze my realities through writing. So for me, writing is as natural to me as for other people is thinking. I almost need it. I feel when I was growing up, I was quite shy and like, I don't know, I kind of lived in my own bubble. My way to really to gain my own voice and really to understand the world that was around me was through my writing. So it's really like the tool that saved me and sort of like made me understand better everything that was happening in my life.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think the way you framed it before was saying that, you know, because you move from one thing to the other or try lots of different things, you're maybe not as expert in one of these things. But I guess the flip side is how much do those things influence each other? Like, do you feel like the writing somehow deepens your understanding of photography and vice versa? Or again, yeah, do they feel like they're completely separate parts of your being?
I think writing deepens my understanding of everything I have an interest on. I feel like writing and my notebooks are really the place in which I can really understand what it is that I'm thinking. I think for photography, it was actually like writing has been quite crucial, and I've been doing this exercise of, okay, if I didn't have a camera, how can I paint this picture in someone's mind? And when I write for other people, not for myself, that is sort of the objective. Our words is strong enough to draw that image. And I guess because I spent my childhood mostly reading, I did see so many things through reading. You know, I didn't really need to leave my room to go to other places and understand other things. So I guess I always been trying to do the same with my writing.
That's an amazing way of thinking about it, yeah, and I love that kind of thread from childhood all the way through. We've got some time now for some audience questions, and yeah, as I said, we had some really interesting ones come through. So I'm going to ask this first one from Africa.
Sure.
I've seen you explored projects documenting cultures like in Japan, or we've obviously touched on. Have you had any thoughts on documenting Spanish culture? And if so, what would your approach to that look like?
Very much. I think this is a really good question. Well, I'm Spanish, that's why they asked particularly if I'm interested in exploring Spanish culture. But yeah, I think I'm from the south of Spain. We do have a very, I think culture in Spain is very divided depending from which community you come from. I was born in Seville, so there is a lot of this flamenco culture. I'm very much moved by that. I love my culture. I feel like I moved here when I was 18, and that's the one thing that I had been missing on my subjects. I really think that I need to go back home and explore home from my, well,
Your
from me.
perspective.
Yeah.
I cannot wait. I mean, yeah, let us know when that series is happening. Naid says, do you have any advice for a self-taught designer trying to get their name out there? So, yeah, someone who's, I guess, yeah, self-taught, trying to, yeah, raise their profile. That question's from Naid.
Yeah, I think, you know, a little bit like what I told you when I first moved to London. I think, don't think too much if what you're doing is the best. It's never going to be the best at the beginning, but you have to keep trying. Someone is going to give you an opportunity out there at some point. Do stay there for the good opportunities. Don't let them pass. And there is no opportunity that is too small. I feel like something I get asked a lot in interviews is what was the project that changed your career? And the reality is that no project changed my career. It's been like a succession of small steps.
That's lovely. And I think, you know, something that Greg and Jeannie also touched on, I think, is this idea that, like, yeah, it just takes one email or it just takes one project to get noticed by the right person, and that can do it. This question comes from Jamal. How do you maintain an authentic creative practice alongside the troubles of the world right now?
Well, I guess art sometimes is meant to, well, there are all kinds of arts. Of course, there is a lot of political art that makes us question our reality. But the kind of art I really enjoy is art that somehow takes you away from reality. And I think I often find a refuge in art. With that, I'm not saying I'm not present in the political problems and natural disasters, but I think art is the escape. So, yeah, I guess that's my way.
This is a question from Liz, which I think might be kind of like asking you which is your favorite baby, but what's the project you're most proud of? Is there an answer to that?
There's not really an answer to that. As I say before, I feel like I don't want to fall in love with anything I have done in the past. I think my work is about constantly questioning what I have done and sort of like move with something fresh, new, what interests me right now. And again, like it's the same thing with no opportunity is too small. for me, no project of mine is being the definitive project. I just have learned different things through doing different projects, so I'm not too attached to any.
And there's a question here about your handwriting. Like, how did you develop that handwriting style, and what does it say about you?
Well, I'm not very sure what it says about me. I don't know if my personality really, I don't know if it is present in the typography itself. It's more about the content of what I'm saying. But I guess a part of it is about staying naive and staying unlearned. I feel that for the longest time, I was trying to write neatly. My writing was terrible in school, and I was always told how I need to write like clearer numbers because they couldn't understand my math equations or things like that. And I think as I became an adult, I had learned to write better, but I decided to sort of like take a steps back and go back to my most authentic self, which is perhaps imperfect, but we are all a little bit imperfect, so why to be dishonest and pretend that
Love it.
It will be something else.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, this question from Pat, which I guess like there's a lot of disciplines we haven't even touched on that you work in. You know, you work in painting as well. But this question is, what's your favorite discipline to work in? Do you have one that's kind of a preferred one, or is it just whatever takes your fancy for a particular idea?
Writing is my go-to. I write every day, and I write a lot, and it's very necessary. But as I say before, I don't have a favorite. I really like trying new things. And one day I will be doing a painting with oils, and another day I want to design a model boat. And, you know, I feel like I cannot choose one. That's why I keep jumping from one to the other.
Yeah, I mean, that is the definition of a multidisciplinary artist. Amazing, that kind of breadth. Finally, just one last question from me, really, which is obviously we're about halfway through 2024. What does the rest of the year have in store for you? Anything that you're particularly excited about? Anything you can talk about? I'm sure there are things you can't, but yeah.
I'm very excited about 2 exhibitions. This next book you mentioned with Chose Commune, which is, well, a new series of writings, but the context is very present on them. And then I do have a show in Japan in October, and also one in the south of France. And right now, I'm just working very hard in the studio to get these 2 out. That will be my focus for the rest of the year.
Amazing. Well, honestly, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
It's been my pleasure, Matt. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. It's been great. And yeah, a huge round of applause, please, for Coco Capitán.
You guys.
Thank you so much.